Alright, so what's up you guys, it's your boy Danchou, and for today's video I want to talk about the latest event that has found its way onto your home screens in Granblue Fantasy, and that will be none other than the Xeno Vohu Manah clash. I figured it would be a good time for me to help out the newer to intermediate players with a guide on what to get and how it all works, to make it easier to understand for those who haven't participated in a Xeno clash before. Now just before we dig into today's video, I just wanted to say that if you do enjoy Granblue Fantasy or Granblue Fantasy Versus content, then you might want to consider hitting that sub button, as I do cover both games and try to keep you guys updated with everything as fast as possible surrounding these games and more. Now with all the typical YouTuber talk out the way, let's get into the video. So first things first, how exactly do these Xeno clashes work? The way these clashes and showdowns work in general is that you have the ability to play the Xeno clash and the regular showdown of the elemental clash that is going on at the same time. But compared to having just the showdowns available, the Xeno clashes give you more to gain as a player. A good example of the benefits you get during these Xeno clashes will be the fact that you can obtain strong EX skill weapons from the event shop with the materials you have farmed up whilst playing the clash event on its own, making it more relevant to participate in the events themselves when the Xeno clashes are live. The clash battles are generally harder than the showdowns, and a good reference point here will be that if you are able to clear either extreme or maniac difficulty showdowns, then you should be able to take on the Xeno clashes as well. In this case, Xeno Vohu Manah's resistance to elements outside of wind will be rather high and comes in at a total of 50%. It's definitely something to keep in mind, so make sure to use your wind teams to properly take on the event. So for the next topic of the video, let's discuss the difficulty of the event as a whole. As for starters, this event can be fairly difficult for newer players. This will be because the Xeno content in general is harder than the basic showdowns as mentioned before, and it's quite punishing to players that don't have the right elemental team to play with, which in this case will be wind. But this doesn't mean that there isn't any merit for participating in the event as a beginner, as you can still walk away with quite some improvement in your pocket for your earth teams if you really want to. I will explain this more in depth in the video as we go, but for now let's turn back to the topic of the difficulty of the event and what you can expect from it. You would have all the regular difficulties that we are familiar with, but we also have the maniac difficulty that will unlock after you've cleared the extreme difficulty quests, and you also have nightmare battles, and there are a total of 3 different difficulties when it comes down to nightmare battles. The difficulties for these quests will be level 70, level 100, and at last 120. You can gradually unlock them by defeating the lower level nightmare quest to unlock the next one, so nothing too complex here. Besides these difficulties, there's more to nightmare battles altogether. For example, nightmare difficulty quests will always appear for you after you've cleared a quest on maniac difficulty. Outside of that, there's more ways to trigger the nightmare battles as well, as they will also appear after clearing the extreme difficulty quest 4 times in a row if the nightmare quest didn't already appear by the 3rd time. The cool part about nightmare battles is that they have requirements based on defeating the raid, and once you meet these requirements 3 times in a row, you will be able to skip the nightmare quest from here on out. You will still obtain the materials as you normally would by skipping the fight, and using the skip mechanic has no drawbacks all around, so if possible, it's definitely the way to go. Now you might be wondering what those requirements in order to skip the fight really are, and those are as follows: beat the raid without someone of your party dying, beat the raid without the use of elixirs, and at last beat the raid within a certain turn limit. Once this has been completed 3 times in a row, you can then skip the nightmare battles from here on out as you please. And to come back to the elemental resistance for a second here, as I mentioned earlier, Xeno Vohu Manah has a total of 50% damage resistance to all elements except for wind. It's really important to make sure you're only attempting to fight with wind-based teams, otherwise you will be cutting your winning chances down by quite a significant margin. With the difficulty and the general baseline of the event discussed, we can now take a look at what we really are grinding for, which in this case will be the Xeno Weapons. You can get 2 Xeno Weapons from this event in multiple ways. For example, if you're lucky enough, you can get the weapons by having them drop for you as you farm, but the general way to obtain these weapons will be by buying them from the shop. The materials needed to purchase the Xeno Weapons from the shop are split between the raid version of the battle and the extreme and nightmare versions of the battle, meaning that you will have to farm both types of battles here, and you can't just focus on one raid that can give you all the materials that you might need. This is specifically the case for the true anima that you will need, which will only drop from the raid version of the battle. But on the contrary, the extreme and maniac battles drop crystal spirits and regular animas in abundance, which balances out the drops amongst the raids. Luckily, the nightmare battles will help you out as well, as they will also give you the materials needed for the Xeno weapon purchases. With that being said, with just about average luck, there will be a decent chance of obtaining a Xeno weapon drop as you go about farming the materials to purchase your copies, which potentially can save you some time from farming altogether. I I will put a simplified drop table on screen right now so you guys have an overview of the materials and where they drop in the event themselves, with estimates on the drop rates of the items too. Feel free to screenshot this so you have it ready to look back on whenever you might need it. Another good overview would be the total amount of items needed to secure yourself the Xeno weapons and its forging materials, which I will yet again put on screen for you guys to screenshot. With the information on how to obtain these Xeno weapons themselves being discussed, we can then move one step forward and talk about which weapons to aim for, and more importantly explain why you would want the weapons in the first place. The Xeno weapons themselves offer you a good pre-4 star uncapped weapon with a massive EX attack weapon skill, which specifically is good news for the newer players, as even a single copy of any Xeno weapon is an excellent addition to most grids and can be reasonably easy obtained by either playing the event raid or defeating the lowest nightmare quest a few times over if that is possible for you to clear. With the weapons being benefiting even without uncapping them completely, the event and farming for the Xeno weapons themselves will become relevant for the lower level players as well, even if they can't hold their own just yet when facing off against these battles. Getting a single copy of these Xeno weapons is relatively easy to do, and the reward you get from it is well worth the effort spent towards obtaining it, even if you are on the lower side, so definitely consider going out there to put in the work. But there is a little spin right here, as there is still one weapon left that isn't a Xeno weapon but still obtainable to get, and the weapon I'm on about here is the Tribunal Thunder. This weapon is already available at all times from the normal Vohu Manah showdown, so specifically during the Xeno clash, obtaining this weapon isn't a priority at all. Chances are that the weapon will naturally drop for you as you play the event, so you can always keep one of those until you have one fully uncapped copy, but otherwise it really isn't worth thinking about. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we do have two Xeno weapons who, in comparison to the Tribunal Thunder gun, are definitely worth picking up instead. First up, we have the Xeno Judgement Lyra Harp. Now this Harp specifically is a pretty good weapon considering its healing focus, and if you pair this weapon with a class like Lumberjack, which already shines in sustainability, you can imagine that this is a great combo for longer lasting fights, as they complement each other's job of surviving very well. Once this Harp is fully uncapped and turned into the true Judgement Lyra, it becomes even better at its sustainability job, as it now also gives the buff Revitalize to all your allies on top of healing 10% of all your allies' HP after a charge attack. What the Revitalize buff does for you once it's in effect is that it recovers HP each turn for those who have the buff inflicted on them, and once your HP is already full, it will start boosting your charge bar instead. The buff lasts for about 3 to 5 turns, making the Harp even better at offering sustainability than before. That will be pretty much it for the Harp, but there's another weapon here on the table, which will be the Sarivar Sword. Now the Sarivar Sword is an interesting weapon on its own, as it's also a weapon rather focused on defense like the Harp instead of offense. Now the sword itself is quite okay before its 4th uncap, and it's a bit more offense orientated compared to the Harp, as it gives a 20% earth attack up boost for 3 to 5 turns after a charge attack instead of the healing effect the Harp would give. But the most unique trait of this sword comes forth once it's uncapped to the last Sarivar, as after this uncap the sword gains the water switch effect on its charge attack, and what the water switch buff specifically does after a charge attack is turning any elemental damage from your enemies into water damage instead for all your allies. This buff lasts for about 3 to 4 turns, and is great for keeping yourself alive in harder fights which deal damage with more elements than just water. Now having the abilities of the sword in mind, it becomes clear that the sword is a great main hand for those who are looking to play defensively in harder raids. A good example for this will be that this weapon specifically is one of the best Spartan class main hand weapons available for Earth, which is great for busting out when it comes to really hard raids. The fact it's a sword also makes it a lot more viable as a main hand all around compared to the Harp. So all in all, it's a great weapon to have around. Now to make things slightly easier for you guys watching, I figured it would be nice to talk about what your priorities should be when tackling this event, from both a beginner point of view and for those who can clear the event on their own relatively well. For starters, for beginners who have trouble with this event, you should completely focus on obtaining a single copy of each Xeno weapon, and anything beyond that is a bonus. As long as one copy of each has been collected, there isn't much more to worry about, and from there on out you can decide whether or not you want to aim for more or call it quits. Specifically for this Xeno clash, both Xeno weapons are highly recommended to get together, as both the weapons are pretty much equally valuable to have. The main difference is that the Harp is slightly more recommended to have if it really comes down to it, but considering the sword has a lot more utility as a main hand compared to the Harp, it evens it out pretty well between the two, as they are both strong and good at their jobs respectively. I'd recommend focusing on obtaining the Harp first and then the sword right after, but keep in mind that the sword will probably see more use as a main hand for beginners compared to the Harp. Then for the players who are more comfortable with with taking on the event itself, the goal should be obtaining both Xeno weapons and uncapping them to a minimum of a 4-star. The uncapping steps will take extra effort and materials, but the reward you get from uncapping the weapons is substantially better than if you were to stop at just obtaining the weapons on their own. So it's more than recommended to aim for a 4-star uncapped copy for both the Xeno weapons to get the most out of this event as a whole. For both player groups, anything besides the Xeno weapons is rather irrelevant or not as important. The summons available from this event is also nothing to fuzz about, but the Xeno version of the summon can be strong when fully uncapped, so if that is something that you desire to have and you really have nothing better, then you can go out and farm up enough to obtain a Xeno summon too. Now normally speaking, my Xeno Clashes guides ended here, but surprisingly enough, it recently got announced that Xeno Clashes are getting slightly upgraded, with this run being the very first to be one of those upgraded clashes. What specifically is new here is that there are some new items added to the store to trade, which some of them are actually pretty good to have added, and the items specifically added for this run are as follows: Earth Halos, Alexiel Summoning Crystals, Earth Urns, Earth Centrums, and True Earth Anima. But the biggest change here is the fact that AX skills are now being introduced to Xeno weapons as well. The reason I didn't make this a segment in this video is because AX skills are a topic on its own. That will make this video last longer and probably get even more confusing for beginners. But the best way I could explain this in a short way is that AX skills are additional buffs to your weapons, and that specifically becomes important for those who are looking to optimize their weapons to the last damage digit. For beginners, the focus is still on just obtaining the weapons first and foremost, and any AX skills added on top of that is just a bonus. So for that reason, I decided to mention it like this compared to making it the topic on its own in this video. The items added to the shop are great to get as well, however not specifically something I'd call a priority, but if you got both weapons already and want to focus on obtaining the items instead that can be useful for you down the line, then it can be worth picking some of them up. And with the new update in mind and the priority set straight from the event, we have come at the end of today's video. This was my Xeno Vohu Manah guide that I wanted to share with the newer to intermediate players, as this event might be tricky to understand at first. So hopefully you guys will find the information I gave today helpful and made you able to go and take on the event with a game plan. If you guys do feel like you want more beginner content in general, then I'll gladly make other videos with more tips and tricks and guides for beginners. So let me know in the comments down below if that is of any interest. And at last, if you guys want more help from me directly, or just feel like joining a place where you can meet more Granblue Fantasy players to talk about the game and have fun, then I do recommend joining my Discord, which I'll provide the link for down below in the pinned comment. And that was it for today guys. It was your boy Danchou. Stay healthy, stay blessed, and I'm out. Peace.